Rebonjour et bonjour à celles et à ceux qui nous ont rejointes. Donc cette troisième et dernière session des journées d'études en lisant, en dansant, forme et pratique de la lecture en danse aborde plutôt l'épistémologie de la recherche. Les historiens et les historiennes de l'art, comme de la danse, mais aussi les notateurs, les notatrices et les archivistes, sont des lecteurs et des lectrices de ces sources matérielles dont on a déjà évoqué la très grande diversité. Aborder ces sources pose des défis considérables qu'il faille considérer les situations et les dispositifs qui les ont produits, les activités et les actions qu'elles permettent d'effectuer, ou les formes d'induction du mouvement qu'elles engagent. L'une de leurs spécificités consiste notamment à faire appel, au-delà des compétences spécialisées, comme celle de savoir lire un système d'analyse du mouvement, à un ensemble de savoirs incorporés, des compétences explicites ou tacites liées aux pratiques du mouvement. Cette expérience empirique s'avère une ressource fondamentale pour regarder et comprendre non seulement des danses, mais encore leur représentation comme autre chose que des formes fixes. La lecture sollicite le corps de celui et celle qui lit. C'est un aspect sur lequel on a clos la précédente session. Ces réflexions, donc loin d'être étrangères à l'histoire de l'art, qui a également très largement été perméable, notamment à la phénoménologie et à la psychanalyse, trouvent dans les sources matérielles de la danse, ses techniques motrices et ses savoirs incorporés, de nouvelles perspectives de réflexion et de développement. Et je cède la parole à Pauline.
Merci Lou. Et donc on a nos deux premiers intervenants, Gabriele Klein qui est professeure à l'université de Hambourg et Franz Anton Cramer qui vont nous parler du projet qu'ils mènent actuellement. Gabriele Klein est donc professeure à l'université de Hambourg en sociologie et en théorie de la danse et sciences du mouvement. Elle a été directrice du groupe de recherche Translation and Framing, pratiques de transformation médiale. Et directrice aussi des études sur la performance à Hambourg et co-directrice du centre de recherche sur les médias et la communication dans la même université. Elle est directrice du pôle d'excellence, c'est une forme de traduction, Understanding Written Artifacts à l'université de Hambourg, et ses nombreuses publications en anglais comprennent des livres comme Dance and Theory avec Gabriele Klein notamment, ou Emerging Bodies en 2011, et des numéros comme On Labor and Performance dans Performance Research en 2012, ainsi que de nombreux articles comme Urban Choreographies dans le Oxford Handbook of Dance and Politics en 2017. Et sa dernière monographie s'intitule Pina Bausch Dance Theatre, Company, Artistic Practices and Reception, et date de 2020. Franz Anton Cramer est chercheur en danse spécialisé dans la recherche archivistique. Il est actuellement associé de recherche dans le projet Choreographing of Archiving, donc dirigé par Gabriele, dans le cadre du groupe d'excellence Understanding Written Artifacts, au sein du Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures de l'Université de Hambourg. Ses publications comprennent notamment Remembering the Future, 40 Years of Dance Fabric à Berlin, 2018, Fluid Access, Archiving Performance-Based Arts en 2017, et aussi en 2016 un article s'intitulant Speaking Africa, Logobie, un dialogue entre l'Allemagne et la Côte d'Ivoire dans le domaine des arts du spectacle. Et je leur laisse la parole. Merci à tous les deux. Merci beaucoup d'être présents ici, à Paris.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you very much for coming back. It's a long day, and thank you very much for inviting us. We are really happy to be here because it's our first conference in co-presence after a long time, and we see that it's very nice to be together and to discuss together, and I'm very happy that we can do it here. Thank you very much again. So we will present today a little research of our project, which is based in what we call in Germany Cluster of Excellence at the University of Hamburg, called Understanding Written Artifacts. And in this cluster we are working on handwriting. What does it mean, handwriting, in different academic fields? And our field, of course, is dance. And we actually were planning a cross-cultural study because we are interested in the question on the relationship between the notion of handwriting in a special culture and handwriting in dance in this culture, you know? So how is it? And it's different to the European context, where we have the narrative since the 20th century that writing is not dancing and dancing is not writing. So that that we have this big discussion in the European context and also in some US American discourses, but not in, let's say, in Senegal, where I worked in former days with Germain Acogny or with Kofi Koko, or probably you know him because he's a living Paris, and other people in India or somewhere else where the culture is different. But now, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we focused in the last year on artists, choreographers based in Germany, because we could get in contact to them, and our results are coming from these people. So our structure, our structure today is that we want to talk about the starting points, where does the project comes from, and our main research question in the project, and then we will present our material, which we used today, and our methodology, and then our results and conclusion. The starting point. The starting point is actually the question of translating. So I worked for a couple of years with the Pina Bausch company, and these are two books. This is the English version and the German version, which were published in the last 2 years. And I worked on the question how dances are transmitted to another company. For example, when Sacre du Printemps was played by the Paris Opera or other companies, or in the company itself. So the process of transmission, which is a translation, from my point of view, a cultural, an artistic and medial translation. There I come from. And my question here is, what we are doing today is, how is the translation between writing and dance, or scriptural and dance. And Franz Anton is coming actually from research on archives, and here is, you can just see a book which he made with Barbara Büscher on archiving performance-based arts. So this is a starting point, and the research questions in our project are now, which all do what we call individual choreographic manuscripts, and their specific aesthetic play for the production, performance, the reconstruction, and the revival of choreography. That's the first question. And then which interaction of the body, movement, material, language, science and writing take place in the ongoing process of production, archiving and reconstruction of choreography. And the last question is, choreographic manuscripts are not individually different, but also, what I said, culture determined. How do they relate to the respective aesthetic genre, the production practices and the cultural status of writing? So these are our main questions, and that means our research perspective is on materialities of writing and choreography. How do they use it? For example, it's very different between the Pina Bausch company, let's say, and the Hamburg Ballet of John Neumeier, the writing practices in the company itself. The different medialities, how are writing practices and recording other video material, for example, are related to each other, and then which techniques are developed by different companies of writing and dancing, yeah, and then of course now the shift between analog and digital archiving practices, as well as their cultural and aesthetic framings, and also their political notions and politics, because It's very differently accepted in different countries and also in different states of journey, I have to say. It depends from the importance of the company. So next, and our methodology is a mixed methodology of analysis of writing, yeah, also image and material analysis, and we also use ethnographic methods, for example, in rehearsals and so on. And in the end, what we did for what we are talking about today is a content analysis of interviews we made with different choreographers on their works.
Right. So this would be the material we are actually basing or have been able to base our research on, and are still in the course of analyzing. So material are choreographic manuscripts produced by contemporary choreographers. So sketches made and all kinds of writing made in different, let's say, periods or phases of the choreographic and artistic and creative process. I'm going to be a bit more specific on that, but these were, let's say, this was the context for the questions that were informing the interviews. We have been able to conduct 8 interviews in the last months, more or less 2 hours each, with 9 choreographers. So that's because there was on tandem a couple of 2 choreographers. That's why, you know, there's a different, and also with 1 choreography we had 2 interviews. So this is why it doesn't really perfectly match together. And what we tried is to consider different generations. Let's say emerging, mid-career, and senior artists. That's a bit the let's say terminology in use. Reinhard Hoffmann is among one of them. This is just to give you a short impression on the role of manuscripts and the role of, let's say, writing or written artifacts in different phases. Reinhard Hoffmann is one of the choreographers. You may know her. She's a representative of Tanztheater. And she's here working with LP covers, so covers of disc vinyl, of various songs and recordings of Maria Callas, who were at the basis, I mean the recordings and the albums, at the basis of her choreography, original choreography on Maria Callas in 1983, and she's reusing these original annotated, sometimes annotated covers for her restaging in 2012. We have another, let's say, another phase. This is Thomas Lehmann, exactly 20 years old. In the preparation phase of a piece, he was a choreographic score he was doing for Schreibstück. So that's the title, written piece, which was published in book form, and using lots of modules and elements. So this is one example of the preparatory phase, writing in the preparatory phase. We have, I think it also toured in France a lot, Urheben, Aufheben by Martin Nachbar, piece on reconstructing, or let's say on negotiating the Affectus Humanus choreography by Doro Hoyer, a historic work, where writing is that's part of the very performance. The piece was in 2008, and the film, I mean, it's on internet, so I did the screenshot last year. Another example is Antje Pfundner in Gesellschaft. Antje Pfundner is a German choreographer. Antje Pfundner in Gesellschaft is the name of her company. In Gesellschaft means in company or in association with. And this is more the phase of the post-production and interaction with the audience. So you see the various notes that have been tagged on this kind of huge textile structure. which is the result of discussions with the audience, memory building by the audience, etc. And until a young emerging, as we say, emerging choreographer, a kind of mood board. She's working with mood board, so that's a mixture of digital and handwriting. This is a teaching score. So,
yeah.
There you go.
Sorry.
I pass over.
What we did is we made these interviews and we transcripted it, and then we made this content analysis. And what came out were actually 4 categories which seem to be important for the use of writing practices. And this is practices and uses of writing, corporal reality and scripted reality, corporal reality, scripted reality, and the digital and written material and archiving. And we will present it now, the first 2 by Franz.
Right. So that's, I was already hinting at that we identified, let's say, a phase model, a model of 3 or 4 stages, 3 essentially, that where writing comes in the choreographic process. So first is, as we see, practices and uses of writing, and there are 3 different ways, essentially 3 different ways. First is the preparatory phase, the conception and funding application. This is in Germany, it's a slightly different model of financing in the independent dance scene. So for each project, for each choreographic piece, you have to apply and you have to prepare a dossier. And so that involves, of course, a lot of writing activity. Then we have the rehearsal and work process. This is where we observed, or where we have been, let's say, told a lot about strategies of scripting and writing by all participants. So it's a bit less hierarchical than we might think. It's not only the choreographer, but it's really based on the specific relationship between choreographer and the company, and on permanent processes of negotiation and communication within the artistic team. And the material that is being developed is written down and described in manifold ways. For instance, just to give some examples, really collective writing processes where one text is handed over to another person who is rewriting it and then rewriting and rewriting. And this is where some kind of a collective score is being developed. Of course, there are feedback sessions and a joint development of choreography. So 2 or 3 people, choreographer and dancer, are working on the score, on the idea of the score, really on a same level basis. Another element is resuming material. This is usually by an outside person. The dramaturg, usually the outside eye, resuming material and topics of a day of rehearsal to make some kind of minute protocol, I think minutes is the English term, sorry, that is then being sent around to everyone, or at least shared with everyone. Another issue is the labeling and giving names to choreographic modules. That will later be maybe also the titles for the scenes. So it's also part of the score building, but it's also, as I said, in constant negotiation. So people discuss, should we name it this way or that way? And then it's for instance, recorded on large wallpapers. And also, of course, the very, let's say, basic question is describing movement sequences and their motivations. This is for future use, or we'll come back to that. And all this happens in varying degrees of formalization and systematization. For instance, as notes, as score, as minutes of the rehearsal on, and there's really a large panoply, loose leaves, post-it tags. We have seen the post-it tags with Ante Pfundner, the large, let's say, black structure. on posters, wallpapers, exercise books, notebooks, etc., etc. And this is following the priorities accorded to writing as part of the choreographic process. And then we had the third, let's say, phase, which is writing in the aftermath of the choreographic process, where we observe, let's say, two directions. Writing strategies are being replaced very often by an approach of just collecting the material and putting it aside. On the other hand, there's also the approach of revisiting all the written material and of doing neat copies, for instance. You know, very often in the process, writing is disorderly, and so in order to be able to come back to that at a later point in time, they're really recopying the material. And also, in another example, once the performance is realized, and so that's really how the show or the performance is supposed to happen, then all the participants really, in a very minute way, write down their part and their action, and this is then compiled to give the definite score. The second part is, or second category, let's say, is corporeality and scripturality, which is, of course, the very topic today. So, interestingly enough, it's always what choreographers say or want to say or have to say on this topic is always starting from the embodied knowledge. So, embodied knowledge seems to be the basis of all writing practices. And there's also a twofold approach. This embodied knowledge is stored to give some expressions from the interviews in the network of the participants, in the living through of the process, or repeating the rehearsal process in order to recall the piece, in a permanent state of dialogue, or also we have had this before, we have seen this this morning, becoming a book. In that case, it's more like becoming a document ourselves. So the company, they have all the knowledge, let's say, and serve as a document. And of course, we have the living archive of the repertoire. Nonetheless, the basic intentional, aesthetic, and processual elements in that are the, let's say, that make up the choreographic piece or process are also, despite the, let's say, focus on embodied knowledge, are at the same time object of description and thereby also of scripturality. For instance, transcribing oral history testimonies, memory notes, minutes of group discussions, etc., etc. And it must also be noted that the use of video material as a sort of medialized corporeality, which is of course very widespread, as a documentation of the process, documentation of the rehearsals, and of course documentation of the performance, is accompanied by the making of informal finding aids such as video diaries, descriptive lists, and similar practices. So the visual and the scriptural are combined.
So now we are coming very shortly to the last 3 and 4 category. This is really an interesting point because these categories, there you find a very big difference between companies who are well established, like Hamburg Ballet, or in Germany, like Pina Bausch Company and Bavaria Opera, or something like that, and the independent dance community, because the big companies get money for archiving and digitalization of their work. For example, the Pina Bausch company got more than 2 million euros to digitalize the work of Pina Bausch from the Cultural Foundation of Germany. And for example, Neumayer Ballet he has a choreologist, but he has also an art historian who is responsible for the archiving practices. And that is very interesting because the archiving practices are very much related to the to what these people learned in their studies of the history of art, how to archive art. And they mostly are not coming from dance, they are coming from visual arts. And so they transmit the structure of archiving practices learned from visual arts to the dance. And that is very interesting. And it's mostly then a structure which is very much geordnet, and of course they use a lot of verbalized things like catchwords, chapter headings, naming, practices of classifying, and so on. That means the structure of the archive is of course done by writing practices. Even the archive is mostly video material and so on, and also in the independent community we had access to, they mostly don't archive their work. So, and that is very interesting because they said, what for? Because they don't perform their piece anymore. So, and they say, I make my piece, I perform it sometimes, and then I make the other one because it's project organized, and nobody is interested in the restaging of a piece of an older piece. That is very different, of course, to established companies. So there is no need for archiving concerning their job, let's say, their profession. And there is, secondly, no money for digitalization and no experience with it, no knowledge about it. So they need to have people who are informed, who know how to do it, and so it doesn't happen. So that means the heritage of writing practices, of video material, and so on, probably it will be gone if not something will, of the independent dance community, if not something will happen in the near future in Germany. So, and that means that what they remember, what they have as an archive in the independent scene is their corporeality, they personally, and their dances as a living archive, and their notes. But also here the notes are not very organized, it's very different, and sometimes it's just on an iPhone, for example, and not handwriting. What they have by handwriting is they throw it away after performance because they have no place for keeping it and so on. That means if we take the third and the fourth category, we have here a big distinction between established companies, independent scene, and archiving practices in the independent scene are just done by some people who have the experience that their pieces are performed again after years. For example, Reinhold Hoffmann, but she's also well established because she's part of dance theater, but not the younger generation. So, and now we come to the conclusion that's very short. That means, of course, writing and scripturality play a central role in dance. That is, if we say this sentence to choreographers we interviewed, they say, yeah, I use it, but is it important? And when we say the aesthetic is also important, how you do it, the practices, the materiality, and it's also important, it's part of your choreographic process. And then I think, oh yeah, probably, but it's not understood or reflected as an aesthetic strategy of developing choreographies. And the second is that we need that choreographers and dancers need actually the competence to reflect these processes via writing, so to make a reflection on it. And this is a very interesting thing because let's say, for example, in the Pina Bausch company, every dancer has a notebook. Pina always wanted that every dancer has a notebook. But I saw a lot of these notebooks, and these notebooks are very, very different. And they write down what they are interested in. There is no structure, but there is no reflection on the process itself, even in this company, because they worked with these improvisation techniques and so on. And that means that this, the second point is probably interesting also for education, dance education, so how people should be educated as a dancer and choreographer. And the third thing is the process of digitalization. As a sociologist, I would say we are actually living in a digital age, but the process of digitalization is in the field of dance at the moment at one point where handwriting is a really essential part of a choreographic practice. And this is really very interesting because the choreographers don't use, for example, iPads where you can write into the iPad and so on. So they use paper and pencil and so on. So it's a very it's a very, let's say old-fashioned handwriting practices. And that means in the end that we find in this choreographic process a very plural and hybrid mediality where handwriting is still a very important process. And so our focus and our interesting point in the project is really the relationship, one of the interesting points, the relationship between handwriting and the choreography as a Raumschrift, as a what is space
Writing in space.
Writing. So thank you very much. This was our presentation.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. On va tenter peut-être quelque chose d'un peu, une intermédialité un peu particulière en faisant une discussion après aussi l'intervention de Mara Fratier et Valarie Williams. Thank you very much for being here. We can see you now, so this is great. Je vais les présenter en français et aussi Valarie Williams et Mara Fratier nous ont transmis leur texte, donc ça peut circuler en anglais et en français pour ceux qui le souhaitent. Voilà, les deux versions. Mara Fratier est conservatrice de la danse au Jerome Lawrence and Robert Lee Theatre Research Institute de l'Ohio State University et également à l'International et trésorière de l'International Council of Kinesthetic Empathy pour les États-Unis. Et fait partie du corps enseignant de Flux Flow Dance and Movement à Columbus dans l'Ohio, où elle enseigne le ballet et la danse contemporaine. Elle a été conférencière aussi au département de la danse de l'Université de l'État de l'Ohio, membre de la Dance Heritage Coalition Hidden Collections Fellow à la bibliothèque des collections, bibliothèque de l'Université de l'État de l'Ohio, et également titulaire d'un diplôme en danse de la même université, d'un certificat d'enseignement aussi de la bonne notation. Du Dance Notation Bureau et voilà, pardon. Valarie Williams collabore à des projets artistiques entre les arts et dans un point de vue aussi de changement social et d'un point de vue engagé. Elle est professeure de danse à l'Université d'État de l'Ohio, diplômée de la Juilliard School et d'un doctorat aussi de la Texas Women's University, et diplôme également de notatrice aussi en labanotation. Et ses recherches sont soutenues par des différentes subventions locales et fédérales, dont le National Endowment for the Arts. Et elle est lauréate en 2020 du prix Ronald et Deborah Ratner de l'Université pour l'excellence de son enseignement. Et elle est également membre de l'International Council de Cinétographie Labanotation, dont elle a été vice-présidente pendant 2 mandats. Et elle a également, en tant que danseuse, étudié aussi pendant les programmes d'été de l'Opéra de Paris en France, et s'est produite aussi à l'Opéra de Dallas et en tournée également à New York. I wanted to thank them very warmly for being present even from remotely from Ohio. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hello, I am Mara Frazier, and I just really want to thank our hosts for everything they've done to allow us to be here via Zoom today and for having us as part of this conference. This is also one of our first conferences since the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're just very happy to be here, so thank you. And I'm Valarie Williams, and so for the past 2 years before the pandemic and during it, we focused on restaging an American modern dance work entitled Rooms that is choreographed by Russian-American choreographer Anna Sokolow in 1955 and is notated by one of her dancers, Ray Cook. And so we used Ray Cook's labanotation score to stage as our focus point to stage the score, and we focused on the process of embodiment, how we use and talk and identify text, and how social exchange transpires in the restaging process. I will share screen just a moment. So we thought we would start today by talking about 2 sources that we used in our process and laying them out side by side for you. The images here are 2 images. On the left is a page from Ray Cook's labanotation score for Rooms. And on the right is a page from Coach Lori May's notes, word notes, as you can see. You can also see that Ray Cook's labanotation score on the left is laid out horizontally, read from the bottom to the top of the page in time, and the body, vertically. So laid out in time vertically, and then the body parts across the staff horizontally. But in contrast, May's notes lay things out more horizontally and use word notes to connect memory to specific notes and sounds in the music that May connected to. Both are texts that aided us in understanding this work and that we synthesized. There's really a lot going on in the difference between these 2 texts. Clearly, they are very different from each other. And while the score shows determinate movements, it's quantifiable, that take place at certain times for each performer. May's notes work from a combination of memory and impressions of the piece that are personal to her, meshed with specific counts and related to a subjective interpretation of the musical phrasing. And so just like the previous discussions and presentation, we really, as stagers, become the embodied archive. And so we negotiate versions of that dance between what is documented in labanotation and then what resides in our own bodies and what resides in the coach's body. And so we create an individual performance appropriate for a particular time in history and for a particular social context. What our process tells us is that labanotation provides expedient access to movement information and facilitates our ability to remember. And labanotation not only provides access to past dance works, but also complicates the concept of documentation of dance in a simple graphic representation of dance movement. To highlight this overall idea of the process, we have a short 1.5-minute video for you.
This year, we worked on restaging Anna Sokolow's 1955 iconic modern dance work, Rooms, from the Lab Notation score. And because it was during the COVID-19 pandemic, we made it into a video dance because the dancers couldn't perform live or even for that matter, necessarily get close to each other during the rehearsal process. Working on a piece like this allows us access to scores and to work on a piece that people don't always get to restage in a student setting.
I love to restage from a live notation score. Once I get it in my own body, then I can translate it to other bodies. So that process is really an iterative process where we go back again, check what we've got, and then our coach Lori comes in, we go back to the score and we keep moving forward.
I've definitely learned that detail is so important, especially with historic work such as this. And it's really cool to see things on a piece of paper come to real life.
Lori May is the executive director of the Anna Sokolow Dance Foundation, and she is essentially the curator of Anna's work. We wanted that professional experience for our students. They are in a professionally tagged degree, and so we were interested in bringing a professional dancer out here and someone who holds the rights and the license to Anna's work.
That experience with Lori May was like, I like to be pushed as a person, and she did that. And she did it in a way that wasn't, I need your leg to be next to your ear, I need you to do 6 pirouettes. It was, what can you bring to the piece, and what can you bring out of you?
Rooms is a really amazing piece because it provides a picture of raw human experience, of being isolated, feeling disconnected, being alone with your thoughts and alone with your anxiety in a world that is just full of disconnected people. By looking to the past and looking to the stories that we have in dance, we can learn things that help us get through really hard experiences like the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so in discussions of dance preservation, one controversial issue that frames our thought about this restaging process is the debates about the ephemerality of dance. On the one hand, there is a strong strain in United States dance studies that dance is ephemeral, it disappears. As Marcia Siegel, dance scholar from the United States and critic, states, dance exists at a perpetual vanishing point. At the moment it is created, it is gone. Siegel and others argue for the need for a richer, written and symbolic description of dance. Now, on the other hand, and in counterpoint to Siegel's sentiment, to this impetus to write down dance, Canadian hemispheric and performance studies scholar Diana Taylor contends debates about the ephemerality of dance are profoundly political. She makes the argument that when we privilege the written word or record of performance, the written record including the score, we reify oppressive cultural structures. We silence performative knowledge that is passed down and may be archived in the body and in community. While here Taylor is specifically discussing indigenous performance practices in South America in the light of the oppression of colonizers, we can take this concept and apply it to the relationship between lab notation score and the embodied memory.
So we agree with Siegel and Taylor, even though they may appear at odds in their approaches and the debate. And we acknowledge that dance does require additional textual information and richer symbolic descriptions. We also recognize what is documented and what is not, and that becomes political capital in the field. We take these views into our practice of restaging from lab notation scores, and we essentially bring together the written information with the score, with the embodied memory, and transmit that back out to our audiences. Our practice engages textual records and embodied knowledge together, and not in opposition or erasure or privilege or of one over the other. Because reading lab notation always automatically implies the body, so you can't read a lab notation score without moving it. A lab notation score is the text
and makes you, as a reader, the embodiment and transmitter of the movement from the page to the body. With our own process of reconstructing dances, we take the view that all media that we can access are relevant to the final product. We start from archival sources. In this project, that meant synthesizing information from the score with archival film, video, recordings, notes, and draft scores, and then transmitting that information through our bodies to the dancers. Here's a few images of some of the archival sources that we drew from, notes relating to the video. Here is some of the, an image of the old video footage. And then, of course, the Laba notation score. So in summary, we really seek to adhere to what is written in the score. But just to detail a little bit of what is here. We read the score. Take it away, Val.
So we utilize these types of artifacts that Mara has in her reading room here at Ohio State University. And we use all this to inform how we look at the score and what we do when we first open up a score. So for those of you who don't work with Laba notation, we generally read it from the bottom left up. And across the page, you can see here there are 3 dancers, F, A, and E, and they're all dancing together because of that horizontal line. And then as you go up the page, you see that dancer A begins moving on count 1, 2, 3, 4. And so, so this allows us to sort of bring together the artifacts that Mara uses, the score that we look at, and then we assemble all this into a discrete flow of movement into our bodies. And so reading the score becomes an iterative process in which we integrate multiple forms of media. We teach our best understanding of the movement material to the cast. And we know that in this stage of the process, we must hold multiple ideas in our bodies all at once. And then in order to bring the dancers clarity about what the movement is, we have to be in agreement and we have to be clear about what we think is written on the page and then how all these additional artifacts over time inform that.
So generally, one of us will teach the dance to the dancers as any regisseur or rehearsal director might, demonstrating movement and explaining it to the dancers, while the other one of us will observe and check what is taught against the score. Importantly, we walk a line in this part of the process, balancing fidelity with interpretivity. There are always, we find, gaps between reality and what is scored. On the other hand, at this point, the score is our most reliable point of access to the piece. So we have to adhere and be accurate. Film and video of others performing the work is always limited by the perspective, the camera angle, and most of all, the situation of that individual performance. So we treat that as secondary. So we really seek to adhere to what is written until such time as we work with a coach.
So in our case for this project, our coach was Laurie May, who danced with Anna Sokolow for 4 decades and is currently the executive director of the Anna Sokolow Foundation. And here she is pictured working with some of our dancers 2 years ago in 2019 when she came in person to work with the first cast. And then in 2021, because of the pandemic and because our university has limited travel until September, she coached the new cast via Zoom. So the coaching part of the process is essential in restaging any dance work from Laba notation score. And the role of that coach really imparts the intention and the quality of the dance and their own embodied remembrances of what the dance truly is to them. So as May puts it, her role as a coach is to get the dancers to be clear about the
movements. And in fact, sometimes May would re-choreograph small little sections to better suit our stage. We were doing it all in the round, or we were doing it on a tour out throughout the rural parts of the state of Ohio. And we had a cast that was all women, and originally the cast was men and women. So she would always do these small little bits for us, and it really begins to transform the work through her interaction with us and through her embodied memory. So because of her master coaching, the dancers take on a clear understanding of the underlying aspects of the dance, and the dance really becomes poignant in a way that it simply can't be with only the score.
Exactly. So as we worked with May, the notation score then became far less important as a mnemonic for remembering the specifics of the dance in that part of the rehearsal process. This is partially because so many small things had changed: counts, order, and also the way the movements were performed. We began to rely more on what May had taught and on the dancers' embodied memories, on new notes and videos and shorthand that we had created during the rehearsal process. So all of those texts that are created by handwriting. In the second year of our process, 6 of our original cast members taught new dancers who had joined the cast. Here we see one of the original cast members teaching one of the new cast members over Zoom.
We got here 6, 7, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, look, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hold another 7, hold another 7, and we're gonna go forward.
So, it was really amazing to see how the new cast members had taken in what Laurie had coached them with and their experience of performing, and then impart that to the new dancers. Here is a shot of, this is really lovely, many of the dancers meeting Laurie for the first time, but over Zoom, and also some of the previous cast coming and greeting Laurie.
Hi, I'm Ari, and I'm also new.
Hi, Ari. Nice to meet you, dear.
Hi, I'm
Jalen.
Hi, I'm Teddy. I'm new.
Good.
So interestingly, even from our first coaching experience with Laurie May in 2019 to our last over Zoom, May changed the interpretation of the dance slightly. And of course, this also is now during a pandemic, and different aspects of the dance are entitled alone, panic, anxiety, desire, the end, suicide. And so we were able to really relate this to the pandemic and what our dancers have been feeling. And some of our dancers asked, does it mean that May did not remember the dance because she changed a few things? And we answered, not at all. Rather, Laurie understood the deep structure of the dance and interpreted it for a new situation, this time during a pandemic and an ultimate video work rather than a live performance. So in our conclusion, from our point of view as directors, one dance has many facets, and text that is the LABA notation score makes performance possible and can spark a generative process. We believe that movement and text are not oppositional, but in our view, entangled. Thank you.
Mettre ici. Thank you very much, and thank you also for showing this great document about our current context. So there was like Zoom in Zoom. Thank you for that. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Peut-être demander aussi, sorry, Gabriele Klein and Franz Anton Cramer to come back. Or maybe we can wait. No, that's why I was. If you could sit here. Questions in the back. Oops.
Thank you. I am not there. Hello, Mara. Where are you? Hello, Mara. Hello, Valerie. Well, I guess it's more like a comment for the conference from yesterday and the participations of today. I got after 13 hours, so I didn't see the ones in the morning. But since we are in the session which is about the epistemological dimension of the process of reading and writing, I guess we are avoiding the question of what is dance and how we access to dance. And while we are kind of talking about it even yesterday, we are not being explicit about what do we refer about dance. If we are talking about, for example, the concept dimension of dance or the realization of the dance, and how, for example, some scores are more related to the realization, while others talk about the general idea, which is the concept dimension of dance. And I'm using just these two notions from the ethnochoreologist Egil Baca. And I guess that's also like a fundamental point about archiving, because if we reflect about what do we consider as dance, if it's more related to the concept of the realization, also we can reflect about the decisions of what to archive, which I think happens in the first example. Thank you.
Do you want to comment on that? Yes. Yes, please.
Well, okay, no, sorry. Sorry. Thank you for your comment anyway. Yeah, a bit of confusion. Well, from my perspective, I think there are two, let's say, not answers, but replies. Of course, that's the eternal question about archiving. That's all that we know, and that also historians in historiography has been articulated as the power structure of the archive and the selecting processes, etc., etc., and the very archive in itself. And so that's maybe really a thank you to your hint to the Marcia Siegel and Diana Taylor, which I think is very pertinent, especially with regards to dance, but because whatever we may want to define as the work of dance or the artifact of dance that needs or needs not to be archived, we have this kind of basic regime that is in the performative or in another, let's say, order. And we just had a workshop last week in Hamburg in a different project, and it's maybe interesting also to recall the Laban notation or kinetography Laban, that Laban's very, let's say, conceptual idea, to answer your question, was that we need to define a dance by the work of dance rather than by the dancer. And we can only transmit the work of dance once it is in written form. So that was one of the major, let's say, impulses in his endeavor. And at the same time, today, I think in contemporary dance contexts of all sorts, it's much more also the dancer. So it's the performance. It's that what is different from the written form. And this is constantly at play in, I think, written dance, in notated dance, and as you know, it was a wonderful example. Well, the teacher, or let's say the holder of the rights, changed elements because of the times had changed, and there was pandemic, and there were different feelings, different experiences. Of course, this influences. So, what is the identity of the dance work? That's probably a question that has been that is at play, or that's important to this discussion. But it also changes with time and history.
Thank you for your presentation, and I would connect your question to the quotations of Diane Taylor and Marcia Siegel. I think we can say after our research that there is a third interpretation. I think that the idea of dance as an ephemeral art, and we distinguish in our discussion actually between the ephemeral and the fluid, you know, in German flüssig und ephemer. So because it's a difference, but this notion of dance as an ephemeral art is a notion of modernity. And if we say, for example, that writing is the basic part of a choreographic process, and then we have another idea of dance, then we don't have the idea of fluid and it's gone and it's never there and it's just whatever, no, you can't catch it and so on. So then we have another idea of what we understand not just as choreography means, as what is the English word for Vorschrift? Or inscription or something, and so we also can develop another idea of dancing itself, I would say.
Valarie and Mara, do you want to comment on this? Do you want to?
Sure. I really appreciate this conversation, and thank you for your presentation so much. I think a lot of what was said, and that we really our findings are that it remains a question, and the question only gets complexified by navigating between these points. One of our experiences has been telling people of different generations we're restaging rooms, and people go, "Oh, rooms!" And it's like everyone knows this. Reaching from the desire section, it kind of, if they've ever gotten a chance to perform it or seen rooms, they remember that and they do it. And that's an example of what I see as a performative, as a piece of the dance that continues on. But there are so many ways to frame dance, and I avoid defining down into one thing. I also think of Laban's concept of dance as a body existing in an idealized concept of space. And so there's actually a theory of dance, but then somehow he also wanted to connect that to bodily performance. I think of the way our performance practices shape our bodies, so then the physical body becomes a type of score or a type of manifestation of the dance, so that you've also shaped the muscles that can do that thing. Talking about media, the visual impression that we hold of the dance or the visual representation of the dance holds some piece. And then, of course, the score, if we come at this from a European text-based framework, then some would say, oh, here's the dance, it's right here, if that was their score on paper. Of course, we all here know that it's more complicated than that, but it is not the dance as well, because it contains such solid physical information.
Yeah, and I would just say that over time, I mean, we've been restaging works from score for about 25, 30 years now, and I've staged rooms 3 different times on 3 different companies or universities, and every time it's different. And I think you have to come to a realization in your own mind, is it worthwhile to restage the dance, or do we just let it go? And we never know it except by its writings, except by its black and white film in 1962, except by maybe the recordings and the writings of Anna herself. But we firmly believe that it's important for the dancers today to understand their history by actually dancing it. And so that's one of the reasons that we continue to restage all types of different works
from score. And we're currently working on a Martha Graham dance from 1936 called Steps in the Street. And we'll finish that up in the fall, restaging it from score, but also once again bringing in the regresseur to coach and to check and to bring a different perspective to the work. So we always have to think about we're doing a work at a particular moment in time with dancers who are trained in a particular way and in a particular society. And so we found that the last 18 months of the pandemic have really shaped how our dancers approach the dance over the last 6 months.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions dans la salle? Ou est-ce que j'ai un petit doute sur l'heure? Attendez. Ouais, okay. So, thank you very much, Valarie and Mara, for your presentation and for answering the questions remotely. Merci beaucoup aussi à Gabriele and Franz Anton Cramer. On va passer à la communication suivante. On fait une petite pause? On a 5 minutes de pause, ok. Ok, donc on a 5 minutes de pause. Pardonnez-moi, je n'avais pas juste le programme sous les yeux. Donc on reprend à 51, voilà. Ok, on va reprendre, s'il vous plaît, pour les dernières interventions de l'après-midi. On va continuer. Ça y est, il y a du monde dehors encore? Non? Donc pour les interventions de l'après-midi, je vais peut-être les présenter en 2 temps, 2 moments séparés. On va revenir aussi à des questions d'interprètes. Nous sommes ravis d'accueillir Juliette Bello qui a pu faire le voyage. Donc, thank you very much for traveling all the way from Washington, D.C. Et c'est particulièrement agréable de pouvoir revoir les collègues aussi d'outre-Atlantique. Juliette Bello est professeure d'histoire de l'art donc à l'American University de Washington. Son livre Modernism on Stage, de ballet russe and the Parisian Avant-Garde a été publié par Ashgate Press en 2013 et elle a été également consultante pour l'exposition Diaghilev and the ballet russe 1909-1929 When Art Dance with Music. Ses publications comprennent notamment les articles dans Art Bulletin, Art Journal, American Art et Modernism Modernity et dans plusieurs ouvrages, notamment le Cambridge Companion to Ballet, The Modernist World and Foreign Artists and Communities in Modern Paris, 1870-1914. C'est des contributions à des catalogues d'expositions et notamment l'exposition Sonia Delaunay qui a lieu à la Tate Moderne et au Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris ou Merce Cunningham au Walker Art Center et Auguste Rodin au Courtauld Arts Institute of Art et au Musée Rodin. Et elle travaille actuellement sur un 2e projet de livre intitulé Rodin's Dancers, Culture in the Age of Spectacle. Merci beaucoup, Juliette.
Merci à vous. Et merci à tous. I want to thank Lou and Pauline for the invitation to participate, and thank you to my fellow speakers as well as the audience. Before I start, I want to mention that I will be presenting some material that is highly offensive and racist. I share it in this public setting because I wish to critique it as part of my analysis of the reception of the Japanese-born actress-dancer Otahisa, better known by her stage name Hanako, which can translate as flower child or little flower. My talk is drawn from a larger essay centered on a corpus of artworks by the sculptor Auguste Rodin that depict Hanako, a corpus that includes more than 50 bust-like portraits, such as the ones you see here. In that essay, I put these works into various contexts, including Rodin's connections to Japanese circles in Paris, the universal and colonial exhibitions that afforded governmental entities as well as non-state actors like Rodin and Hanako the opportunity to fashion their identities on an international stage, and transformations in the practice of kabuki theater in Japan and beyond. I consider how the increasing mobility of persons and of goods occasioned by the intersections of entertainment culture, economic policy, and imperial politics impacted French identity, as well as how France became a stage for the performance of Japanese nationhood at a crucial moment of empire building. Today, though, inspired by the concept of dance literacy that we have been discussing, I will concentrate on a suite of drawings produced from posing sessions that Rodin and Hanako held in early 1907 during her run at the Théâtre Moderne. While these are not dance notations strictly speaking, I believe it is illuminating to put them in the context of a long history of efforts to, quote, discover the means of making the art of dance comprehensible on paper. And here I cite, of course, the directive of Louis XIV to principal dancing master Pierre Beauchamp in the 1670s to devise such a system of notation. These sketches constitute a dance archive that enables us to read performances that are otherwise lost to history. Although, as we will see, the relationship of the drawn image to embodied practice is by no means straightforward. My analysis of these images, therefore, will focus on apparent gaps, as well as points of convergence between Hanako's gestural idiom and the system of mark-making that Rodin used to represent it. In asking us to pay attention to the complexities of the interactions between Hanako and Rodin, I also aim to bring into our conversation a consideration of the power dynamics that inevitably arise in setting dances to paper, especially when, as in this case, those dynamics map onto larger social, cultural, and political structures, as well as racial and gendered hierarchies. These are precisely the issues that Susan Foster addresses in her writing on Fouillet notation. As Foster points out, that system, which understood the body as capable of a universal form of communication, emerged at a pivotal point in the expansion of global trade relations and in the building of Europe's colonial empires. By absorbing dances of varied cultural origin into a homogenizing set of protocols for bodily comportment that could be disseminated globally, Foster argues, the Fouillet system both mirrored and abetted the expansionist politics of its moment. An analogous claim has been made about Rodin's images of Hanako by Kathy Foley. In an essay entitled Hanako and the European Imagination, she argues that they embody, quote, an imbalance of trade built by gender and race relations, unquote. An imbalance that mirrored the unequal treaties governing Franco-Japanese relations from the 1850s through the 19-teens. Comparing these sketches to Rodin's drawings of dancers from the Cambodian Royal Ballet, who, like Hanako, made their French debut at the 1906 Exposition Coloniale, Foley decries the tendency to accord Rodin's drawings an authoritative status relative to his models, to, in essence, let Rodin's images speak for these performers. Quote, should we not consider the performer's experience to be as important as the impact they had on Western artists, she rightly asks. But this presumes that the drawings do not themselves register Hanako's perspective. One of these sketches suggests otherwise. Just to the right of Hanako's visage appear the Japanese characters flower and child. Below, Hanako is written in the actress's careful script. A parenthetical caption in the same handwriting declares it to be Hanako's signature. Further down, Rodin signed his name and emphatically underlined it. We can only speculate about how, when, and why Hanako affixed her name to this drawing, or how Rodin felt about this gambit. Nevertheless, the gesture seems significant. On the most basic level, it is an act of self-assertion. By marking the page, Hanako registered her presence in and subtly destabilized Rodin's authority over spaces both real, his studio, and artistic, his drawing. The labeling of her name as a signature makes an even bolder statement, given the long-standing association of the artist's signature with the act and rights of authorship. Was Hanako claiming ownership of her image and, by extension, presenting herself as the co-author of Rodin's drawing? If so, we might consider not only this, but all of the drawings as the product of a collaboration, whose forms were shaped both by Hanako's poses and by Rodin's hand, each responding to the other. At the very least, it invites us to reframe the drawing sheet not as a space over which Rodin had full control, but rather as a site of negotiation between two competing agendas, where Rodin's vision of Hanako and of himself confronted the image that she wished to project. When Hanako arrived in France, she was billed as the leader of a troupe from the Tokyo Imperial Theater and as a descendant of the illustrious Ichikawa Danjuro lineage of kabuki actors. Hanako may not have been solely responsible for this completely fabricated story, but she certainly played an active part in shaping her reputation. Indeed, it is almost entirely through interviews with Hanako that we know the dramatic and likely embellished story of her life. As that story goes, Otahisa was born in 1868. As a young girl, she learned Nihonbuyo, or traditional dance, and kabuki-style acting. At 16, she became a geisha. In 1902, she joined a dance troupe bound for an exposition in Copenhagen. After that troupe's other members returned home, Hanako joined another group of Japanese actors, then touring Europe. During a run at London's Savoy Theatre, she came to the attention of the dancer choreographer Loie Fuller, who booked her a series of performances in France. Her first shows were in Marseille in June 1906 at the Casino de la Plage, a vaudeville hall where Hanako appeared alongside Fuller, as well as a tenor-baritone duo, a fantastical aerial ballet, and cinematograph screenings. She then helped to inaugurate the music hall at the Exposition Coloniale, sharing the bill with one Miss Rose Rockefeller of the Metropolitan Opera. There, she performed several one-act pieces inspired by kabuki theater. In Zingoro, which was billed as the Japanese Galatea, she played a beloved statue that comes miraculously to life. In The Geisha's Vengeance, she starred as the geisha Osode, who, after a series of complex plot twists, kills her lover's murderer and commits suicide. Though Hanako appeared at the Exposition Coloniale, her performances exceeded the ethnographic framework typically associated with colonial exhibits. Aided by Fuller, Hanako took advantage of the platform that this event provided her, capitalizing on the popularity of so-called exotic attractions while distancing herself from the displays on offer elsewhere at the Exposition. And here I am indebted to Elizabeth Emery's recent essay on another kabuki actress, Sadayako, with whom Hanako was often compared. As an article in the Petit Marseillais noted, quote, "This will not be a vulgar café concert." Instead, the music hall would teach the public about the arts of other nations, starting with the illustrious Japanese star Hanako, who would, quote, "initiate us into their art, so great and original," unquote. Not surprisingly, many French viewers saw Hanako through an Orientalist lens, and the publicity she received employed racist tropes, as in the caricature shown here. Reviews compared her performance style to objects popularized by the Japanese craze, such as ukiyo-e prints, painted lacquers, and ivory carvings. Critics responded positively to the play's most stereotypical elements, above all, Hanako's performance of suicide. In an extended description of that scene, the article you see at the top right described how, quote, "her eyes convulse, her nostrils palpitate, her visage blanches, her white tunic is tinted with a touch of red, she rolls on the floor, she dies," unquote. This vivid description is one of few surviving records of Haneko's performances. Rodin's sketches constitute another important source, though it is clear that their making involved a complex interplay between what Haneko did and what Rodin saw or wanted to see, and how he chose to render it. Crucially, Rodin's encounter with Haneko took place against the backdrop of a major change in his approach to drawing. Earlier, he had employed a style that loosely can be described as sculptural, in which he used stark juxtapositions of light and dark to create powerfully volumetric effects. During the late 1890s, Rodin instead began to emphasize contour over volume, using a dynamic and exuberant line that wandered across the page with apparent liberty. Rodin frequently attributed this technique to his training under Horace Lecoq de Bois-Baudouin at the École Nationale Supérieure des Arts Décoratifs. In his life drawing classes, Lecoq asked the models to move freely, forcing his students to quickly capture fleeting positions of the body. The critic Louis Vaucel described Rodin's process exactly this way in a 1908 article based on interviews with the artist. He, quote, follows... Should I just close it? Okay. Sorry. Okay, the artist, quote, follows his models with his eyes and pencil in hand, seizes the being in the midst of movement, throws the silhouette on paper, unquote. So I hope you notice the emphatically physical terms that are being used, such as seize, right? This is posited as a kind of embodied vision, embodied reception. And this technique supposedly allowed Rodin to transmit an unfiltered view. And here I quote again from Vaucel, quote, it is not at all a question in these sketches of interpreting, but of catching life as it flies by, unquote. Rodin clearly wanted his drawings to be seen as direct, accurate renderings of the moving body. Perhaps for this reason, Rodin rarely mentioned another aspect of Lecoq's training, namely memory drawing. Lecoq's students made initial sketches in front of the model in motion, but later elaborated those drawings from their recollections. And this is obvious, hopefully, in the drawings that you see here, right? Obviously, the one on the left is sort of exemplifies that sculptural style. The ones on the right are from the later period. And if you look at the Cambodian dancer, of course, you'll notice that it happens in 3 stages. There's the initial pencil drawing, then there's watercolor, which of course has to dry, and then another layer of pencil. So this took place over several sittings, not just at once. The Haneko, it's a little bit more subtle, but you'll notice that there's pen as well as pencil. So here on the arm, the contour of the body, and here at the bottom of the foot. So it's clear again that that those kinds of marks are not made in front of Haneko, but they're made later in sort of as a product of reflection and interpretation. So against what Vaucel claims, right? As Rodin publicized this new drawing technique, he increasingly linked it with the visual and performance cultures of East and Southeast Asia. In the lead up to his first retrospective exhibition in Paris, which was timed to coincide with the 1900 Exposition Universelle, Rodin announced that the show would include drawings, which he called instantaneous drawings, and he described them as being, quote, of a genre mixing the Greek and the Japanese, unquote. And so here, of course, you can see some publicity around Rodin's drawing sessions with the Cambodian dancers, as well as him inside his exhibition. You can see the room of drawings behind him. It seems that he wished to align his drawings with the formal characteristics of ukiyo-e prints, and thus to justify their radically simplified shapes, flattened forms, and oblique perspectives. Rodin may also have alluded to Greek and Japanese art in order to project a veneer of art historical respectability onto the erotic scenarios depicted in many of the drawings. It's possible that he intended his posing sessions with Haneko to burnish this reputation. A former geisha who reprised that role on stage, she seemingly fit the stereotype of the submissive, sexually available, quote-unquote, Oriental woman. But the woman who dances across Rodin's drawings defies that trope. She is a robust presence whose muscular physique and expansive movements belie her 4-foot stature. Her gestures are highly athletic. She lunges forward, bends to the ground, spirals around, and balances vertiginously on one foot, her other leg suspended at hip height. Of course, given what we know about Rodin's drawing technique, we should not approach these images as transparent renderings, but as works that may combine observations of Haneko's gestural vocabulary with recollections after the fact. Moreover, it is unclear what relations the poses Haneko rendered in Rodin's studio bore to her staged performances, or what relation her staged performances bore to kabuki or nihonbuyo technique. Nevertheless, these images offer us tantalizing clues about Haneko's performance style. If we place the drawings in a sequence and imagine the movements between them, Haneko renders a graceful turn like those performed by female nihonbuyo dancers. She appears to twist or pivot by crossing one leg in front of the other. Her upper body creates a subtle opposition to the legs. One arm, bent sharply at the elbow, moves across her chest in the direction opposite the moving leg, while the other arm raises above the shoulder plane. Her hands bend back at the fingers and wrist, and her head tilts sideways toward the shoulders. But the gender associations of her movements as depicted by Rodin are strikingly mobile. While some drawings depict her with knees knocked in a typically feminine bodily carriage, in others she balances with her leg lifted in a 90-degree bend characteristic of the dynamic male wild warrior kabuki acting style. These drawings also accord with Haneko's well-known ability to hold challenging poses for long stretches of time, especially in Zingoro, where she took on the role of a doll that comes to life, or a sculpture that comes to life. The resonance with the Pygmalion myth in Zingoro could not have been lost on Rodin. Haneko's performance as a quasi-sculptural object surely prompted him to note parallels between her acting technique and his sculptural aesthetic. His drawings of Haneko explore such resonances: the opposition of limbs, spiraling torqued torsos, radically uneven distribution of weight, poses suspended between motion and stillness. Indeed, some images bear striking resemblance to Rodin's sculptural compositions, suggesting either that he wished to stress commonalities between them or that he projected aspects of his signature style onto her figure. In the example that you see here, Haneko's upper body echoes that of Rodin's Age of Bronze from 1877. Her left arm reaches up and bends sharply toward her upturned head. The motion of her arm pulls her rib cage away from her hips, creating an elongated curving line in the left upper torso. Her bulging biceps and shoulders, which are more pronounced here than in any of Rodin's other drawings of Haneko, make the actress's body look masculine in spite of the visible right breast. Another drawing depicts Haneko in a deep lunge, with her back leg precariously balanced on the top of the foot. Her torso is angled slightly forward and both arms are fully outstretched. At the top of the page, Rodin added a cryptic notation, faire la tosse de fils d'Ugolin, seemingly referencing one of the subsidiary figures in his Ugolino and his Children, a composition derived from his Gates of Hell. How should we read this phrase and its relation to the drawn image? There are various possibilities. Perhaps Rodin perceived similarities between the position of Haneko's body and that of Ugolino's son. Formal similarities underscored by thematic resonances, by two stories that end in death. But a different explanation is also conceivable, that Haneko, while posing in Rodin's studio, saw his sculpture and incorporated part of its composition into her pose. Admittedly, the possibility that Haneko cast herself in the role of Rodin's sculpture is highly speculative and may even seem somewhat far-fetched. Nevertheless, I raise it because it gives us a new way to approach the question at the heart of Susan Foster's analysis of dance notation, namely, under what conditions can one body claim to know what another is feeling? Foster is trying to draw attention to the ways in which European dancing masters arrogated to themselves the power to imaginatively inhabit bodies under their control, including bodies that they viewed as other in terms of race or nationality. The parallels with Rodin are clear. Like many of his contemporaries, he was fascinated with Haneko's performance of bodily suffering. His repeated attempts to portray her pain suggest both that he wished to get inside her skin, and they speak to the difficulty that he faced in doing so. If, as I have suggested, Haneko may have tried to feel her way inside Rodin's art, it serves as an important reminder that the power dynamic between these two may have been asymmetrical, but it was not wholly determinative. Certainly, she did not, as Foley would have it, simply, quote, disappear into the representation that Rodin constructed for her, unquote. She actively engaged in, perhaps even sought out, an interaction with the sculpture. She traded upon the authority that Rodin's name carried, his reputation as a creative genius, built implicitly on his gender, his race, his nationality, to construct her own artistic persona, and to spin the mythic identity she created for herself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliette. Actually, could you stay here? On fait peut-être une petite séance de questions juste après, et après on pourra revenir sur les deux en même temps. Thank you also for also giving like political perspectives on the lecture of drawings and bodies. So, on va faire une petite séance de questions avant de passer aussi à la dernière session. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? J'aurais une question par rapport au sorry. Regarding the sources also you used, is there also anything mentioned in some correspondence by Rodin regarding the relationship you described, like in a very subtle way, on like his vision of Hanako and what also she brought, like what kind of other documents we have?
Yeah. There's very little. It's frustrating because they didn't share a spoken language. So what's interesting actually in the Musée Rodin, there are tons of postcards that Hanako sent to him. She would send him, she was on tour here or there. She would send him photographs. She cultivated a pretty close relationship with Rodin and Madame Rodin. She often would write to Rose Buret. But I don't think that there was much verbal interaction between the two of them. What we know from his appointment books is that there were at least 3 posing sessions that they did in 1907. And beyond that, I mean, I'm still working with the Musée Rodin to make sure that I see all of the documentation that they have, but at the moment, that's all that I know. The other interesting thing that I think is worth mentioning in this context, though, is that, which I didn't have time to discuss here, but which I think is really important, is that she was determined to have a copy of his sculpture of her. She wrote to him over and over and over again, asking for that sculpture. And eventually, even after he died, she was in touch with his secretaries, and she finally obtained 2 copies, which she then brought back to her in 1921 to Japan. And sort of used them as part of her, I think, the image of herself that she's trying to construct in the public. So I think, I think that largely what I'm doing, both in terms of the correspondence and documentation and the visual evidence, is sort of reading between, in a sense, because I think, as all of the papers so far in these studies have shown, there's a lot that isn't captured, right? There's a lot that goes sort of between, that isn't recorded. And for me, I guess, you know, the opportunity to use that productively and sort of politically as a space in which I can insist that we take Hanako seriously as an artist, as a person, as somebody who had a vision for herself and something that she wanted to accomplish. To me, it's sort of gives me the opportunity, because it's always been, as I suggested, the other way around. Even when there's a sort of complaint about that, there's the assumption that sort of that Rodin dominates the interaction. And I think it's because nobody really has looked that closely actually at the drawings themselves. And if you look at them, then you can see, and yeah, I hope that you can see that. Hopefully you agree with me that you can see it.
I was just going to say that's totally fascinating and to me completely convincing. And I don't know Rodin's graphic work all that well, but it struck me that you could say sort of even more about the specificity of the line. I mean, you know, drawing is a kind of dance, right? I mean, it's also a kind of notation of an encounter, but it's a sort of choreographic move, right? And in some cases, the line, I feel, and again, maybe I'm reading too much into it, or I don't know how it compares to other works by him, but there's a bit of a hesitation there and a kind of loss of control. And to some extent, it almost looks as if he's kind of trying to erase her a little bit, like one of the colored drawing studies, but in the other, it's not a full kind of sense of command. And maybe it's working out this choreography, but I think you could, even kind of push that idea through this, the way in which this line appears.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, obviously this was an abbreviated version of this. And in my essay on Rodin and the Cambodian dancers, I talk much more about that and explicitly. So in order to explain this, I have to go back a little bit and say, so Rodin claimed that he drew blind, which meant that he would watch the dancer and draw without looking at his page. But actually, if you look at one of the photographs of him drawing the Cambodian dancers, he's looking at the page. So it's like he was a master of saying what he wanted to say about himself, and it's a testament to his ability to do that we have accepted for so long the story that he tells about his technique. So I agree with you that not only if you really look at the drawings, that you can see hesitation, indecision, lack of clarity. He's trying to catch up with the dancer. He doesn't know. And also remember, these are dances he doesn't fully understand.
Well, she's moving or she's shaping his line, his hand.
Yeah.
Physically having him move.
That's right. And so the other thing is, what's amazing about the Cambodian dance drawings is that he often drew their hands performing mudras. And if you think about it, if he's drawing with his hand, watching them, he's drawing a hand that looks like the hand that he's drawing. And so that point of convergence for me is about him, all of this kind of, the way he stages his drawing process as physical. He's trying to represent his drawing method as dance-like. And that's the importance of the publicity for him. The reason why he has all those photographs of himself is because he wants his drawing to be seen a certain way, and dance can help him do it. So, and as I say, I think it's the rhetoric around the drawings that has blinded us to just looking at them carefully and really trying to understand what's happening in them. So thank you, Meredith, for that observation.
Sorry for my English, but drawing by blind reminds me that the notator Muriel Topaz, who was directing the Dance Notation Bureau, was notating blind also. It means that she had un carnet, je sais pas comment dire,
notebook.
Notebook. And she was always this and she was not using video so much instead of now. So it was a real training that we don't have so much here in France. I think in United States they notate also the way of taking short notes, always, and very quickly.
Well, and I'm curious about our speakers from yesterday about the Benesch method. Maybe you can speak to, you know, how you're, when you're notating, how your body might be engaged or not. But for me, listening to those presentations was very generative because I was thinking both about the idea of the idea of dance notation as universal and whether it can be universal, or whether that is colonizing concept, actually, in some ways, I guess. I mean, you know, whether we want to acknowledge that all systems of notation, including Rodin's, are culturally specific ways of recording bodies, understanding bodies, thinking about bodies. That, and then also, yeah, sort of how you use your bodies when you're notating a dance. I was very curious to hear more about that. Yeah, maybe.
Two things. First, what you described, Jean-Christophe, we do train for that. It's a question of culture, I think. Like, well, training of the notators, like, I'm not able to notate blind, sorry, totally, but I did receive this practice as a training. And also, I don't have really the words because it's something still a bit mysterious in a way, but when you write with notation, your kinesthetic sense is really operating as much as your visual sense or something. And so it's really entrelacé.
Intertwined.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interlaced, yeah.
It's very, well, it's something, I think there are few words written about this very specific activity, or maybe the scholars here could help more, but I read very few things about it. But there is certainly something to go further and deeper about it, because this question of the signs being both visual and kinesthetic, and also perception and so on. So.
Yeah, I think Susan Foster uses the term kinesthetic empathy, which I think is what you're describing. And as was clear in my talk, I find her work very generative in terms of thinking about that. And yeah, I think that, you know, but it does raise this sort of question of, I mean, I think that your point is really important, which is that experiences that we tend to call visual are not just visual. They're also kinesthetic, but in particularly, I would say, I guess, just speaking for my own discipline in the history of art, that the haptic and the kinesthetic have been pushed out of our language. We sort of are trained to forget that we have a body when we're looking at something, and so we're instructed to simply respond to the visual cues. But of course, we're feeling the kinesthetic as we're doing it. A colleague and friend just wrote a book that's about kinesthetic empathy and abstraction called Moving Modernism. So if you're interested, it's a great book and sort of tries to bring back the kinesthetic into the language of how we talk about abstract art.
Une dernière petite chose avant.
Well, I think the difference is about time. In a drawing, the time is on the page and on the same, stays on the page. In the notation, time goes on and on and on. So you're not always on the same page. You have to go with it. So that's also the difference in the blind drawing and the blind notating.
I think that if we look carefully at some of those drawings, though, they have a temporality as well. Yes. I mean, I think that temporality is encoded in the drawing.
Space temporality and the difference of space temporality, right. I think. Right. Yeah. Last one.
Thank you. I think it echoes what we also heard just before about the ephemerality of quality of dance. I think there's also something to discuss about the ephemeral character of drawing that is sometimes put on side. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Juliette. on va accueillir nos derniers intervenants et rester, je pense, dans des considérations qui, voilà, quelques échos qui vont se poursuivre avec Julien Bruno, qui est danseur, chorégraphe et plasticien à l'intersection du mouvement, du dessin et de la parole, et sa pratique repose sur les échanges multiples entre intériorité et collectivité. Démarche est mise en œuvre à travers des dispositifs divers, performances, spectacles, installations, publications, transmissions ou laboratoires discursifs. Il détient un master en arts visuels et en chorégraphie. Également, il fait partie du groupe de recherche Third à Amsterdam. Et il est en outre impliqué dans l'écriture et l'édition dans le domaine de la recherche aussi artistique et notamment dans la plateforme internet Oral Site BE. Et publie dans diverses revues et livres. Il enseigne au master en danse au conservatoire d'Anvers également et à Passe à Bruxelles. Anouk Lawrence est artiste chorégraphique, professeure de danse, chercheuse et praticienne aussi de shiatsu basée à Bruxelles, diplômée du Centre national de danse contemporaine d'Angers en 92. Elle a été interprète et se consacre à la composition instantanée et plus particulièrement aux partitions de Lisa Nelson-Tunning. Elle assiste aussi le professeur de rythme Fernand China à Parts. Et elle adapte et interprète Room, un solo de Deborah Hay en 2005, et est artiste en résidence à Charleroi Danse en 2008, où elle crée le solo Helium. Depuis, elle collabore avec Julien Bruno sur sa recherche artistique phréatique. Elle est également impliquée dans divers projets. Je citerai celui de Heike Langsdorff, Distraction as Discipline, et Elena Dietrich, Elastic Habitat and Embodied Approach to Design. Et elle mène actuellement aussi sa propre recherche sur la documentation poétique et polyphonique. Et je leur laisse la parole ou l'espace.
Bonjour. Je vais aussi commencer par des remerciements. Merci Lou, merci Pauline et merci Lina pour votre accueil. Vous avez entendu ça souvent aujourd'hui, mais l'accueil était remarquable, donc ça vaut la peine de le répéter. Merci aussi à vous d'être là, d'être encore là, pour ceux qui sont là depuis ce matin. Donc on va vous proposer quelque chose avec Anouk Lawrence, qui est basé sur une pièce qui a été créée il y a une dizaine d'années et qui s'intitule Meta Instrument Score. Ça a été créé au Bain Connective à Bruxelles, avec la collaboration également d'autres danseuses, Sonia Si Ahmed, Maya Delinsky et Laure Myers, qui ont aussi dansé la pièce dans différentes circonstances. Pour nous, l'enjeu principal aujourd'hui, c'est que vous puissiez être spectateur, spectatrice d'un extrait de cette pièce. Donc dans quelques instants, Anouk va interpréter à peu près 15 minutes de cette pièce qui en compte environ le double dans sa forme intégrale. Et donc avant d'assister à sa danse, je vais juste proposer quelques notes pour contextualiser un peu la pièce et relever quelques points qui sont particulièrement pertinents pour nos discussions ici. Vous avez sans doute vu préparer ce pupitre tout à l'heure qui, au moment de l'interprétation, arrivera un peu plus au centre de la pièce. Ça témoigne du fait que c'est une pièce qui repose sur une relation à vue, en direct, entre la danseuse et la partition qui se trouve donc sur le pupitre, avec la volonté explicite de rendre visibles les gestes de lecture de la partition et de les intégrer comme éléments à proprement parler chorégraphiques et également dramaturgiques. Donc vous allez voir qu'on donne de la place et de l'importance au jeu du regard, au temps de lecture et au temps de maturation de l'information qui se trouve sur la partition et qui prend son temps pour se frayer un chemin dans le corps de la danseuse et dans l'espace. Alors c'est une partition composite qui est faite de 3 éléments. Je vais vous montrer à l'écran ce qui se trouve là sur le pupitre, si je trouve les bons boutons. Oui. Donc, un premier élément, un dessin abstrait, un format A4, qui a été réalisé collectivement avec les danseuses que j'ai mentionnées précédemment, et qui fait donc de cette page, j'ai noté cette expression de Juliette, qui fait de cette page un site de négociation, puisqu'on était plusieurs à réaliser ce dessin et à devoir négocier entre nous son chemin, son aventure, jusqu'à ce qu'il soit réalisé. Alors ensuite, le deuxième élément, donc on superpose, vous voyez c'est le même dessin, mais on a superposé dessus une fiche transparente sur laquelle a été dessinée une silhouette, de sorte à transformer ce dessin abstrait à l'origine en une cartographie énergétique d'activités internes et externes au corps. Et un troisième élément, c'est donc une figure religieuse issue de la peinture flamande du XVe siècle. Ici, en l'occurrence, donc la Vierge Marie au pied de la croix. Ici, c'est le pied de la croix. Le tableau se prolonge et on voit le Christ en croix. Et c'est donc un détail du triptyque des 7 sacrements de Rogier van der Weyden. Alors, il y a plusieurs choses j'ai plusieurs choses là à dire sur ces images. C'est que premièrement, Anouk aurait pu danser avec un autre dessin abstrait et avec une autre figure religieuse issue de cette même époque. C'est-à-dire que la pièce ne fixe pas une fois pour toutes certaines images, elle fixe plutôt un certain mode de relation, un répertoire d'images. Donc on a un répertoire de ces dessins abstraits, peut-être similaires à ceux que je vous ai montrés, dont certains d'ailleurs ont été réalisés à l'aveugle, pour continuer à faire écho à nos discussions. Et de la même manière, elle aurait pu aller puiser une autre figure religieuse datant de la même période historique et de la même école flamande. D'ailleurs, lorsqu'on joue la pièce, le public reçoit un certain nombre de livrets dans lesquels il peut voir des images similaires à celles qui sont sur le pupitre. Elles sont distinctes, mais il a une image abstraite, une silhouette et une figure religieuse telle qu'elle aurait pu être choisie, telle qu'elle aurait pu être dansée, mais qui ne sera pas dansée aujourd'hui. Ceux qui sont intéressés, j'ai des exemplaires de ces livrets-là. Ici, par économie de temps, je ne me plonge pas dedans, mais comme ça, vous savez que ça existe et on peut en reparler plus tard. Un troisième élément, c'est que ni le dessin abstrait ni la peinture religieuse n'ont a priori vocation à être des partitions de danse. Elles ne cherchent pas à documenter la danse, elles ne cherchent pas à la représenter, elles ne cherchent pas à l'origine même à la susciter. C'est vrai aussi des dessins abstraits qui étaient faits au départ comme un exercice de composition sur le papier. Ce qui explique le premier aspect de mon titre pour notre présentation aujourd'hui, partition impossible, parce que c'est une partition qui n'est pas un ensemble de signes qui viendraient codifier des mouvements prescrits, où quand Anouk s'y rapporte, elle sait ce que la partition lui demande et elle le reproduit. On joue en effet sur un excès de la partition qui ne peut jamais être complètement traduite, puisqu'elle n'est pas réduite à un ensemble de signes. Donc Anouk ne sait jamais par avance quel mouvement la partition va susciter, et je ne le sais pas non plus. Et il y a une volonté justement de garder ça vivant comme une question qu'elle vit instant par instant. Comment ça se passe concrètement? C'est que donc plutôt que de lire, et je vais me concentrer là sur le dessin abstrait, plutôt que de lire ces traces comme des signes qui prescrivent un mouvement donné, elle cherche à s'imprégner de ces traces. Donc elle fait correspondre ces traces aux zones du corps concernée. C'est l'autre. Voilà. Elle fait correspondre les traces aux zones du corps concernées, sans présupposer de ce qui va en émerger, se rend attentive au fourmillement de micro-activités que cela provoque, changement de tonus, changement d'alignement dans les différentes zones du corps, changement de posture, et elle investit ce champ d'activité pour en faire fleurir un mouvement qui petit à petit trouve son chemin dans le corps puis dans l'espace. Ce processus particulier crée un certain effet d'intériorité que je nomme paradoxal. Donc c'est le deuxième élément de mon titre, partition impossible et intériorité paradoxale. Et je la nomme paradoxale simplement pour la distinguer de la manière dont on se représente d'habitude l'intériorité comme quelque chose de privé qui est lié à la psychologie de la personne et qui serait opaque à l'observateur. Or ici, ce qu'on propose, c'est une danse qui laisse émerger un affect d'intériorité du fait de l'écoute attentive à nous vis-à-vis de l'intimité de son expérience corporelle, mais qui est suscité par le dispositif extérieur et artificiel de la partition, et qui est dans une certaine mesure lisible pour nous observateurs qui suivons son chemin d'attention circuler entre la partition extérieure et son vécu corporel. Bien sûr, le choix de travailler avec des images religieuses participe de cet intérêt pour l'intériorité, qui est donc adressé à la fois comme expérience de la danseuse, peut-être de nous spectateurs, mais aussi donc l'intériorité dans sa dimension culturelle. On va chercher des images qui participent de notre imaginaire collectif sur ce qu'est l'intériorité. En nous intéressant donc aux primitifs flamands du XVe siècle, chez qui je trouve une convergence stimulante entre, d'une part, une atmosphère de recueillement qui résonne avec cette exploration de l'intériorité, et à la fois une curiosité et un savoir-faire sans précédent pour rendre compte des matières, des textures, des étoffes, des objets, des détails physiques. Et donc, cette convergence entre recueillement et sensualité de la matérialité m'intéresse dans ces peintures pour cette pièce. Et un deuxième aspect plus important encore que je trouve chez eux, c'est lié à la technique même. Donc, les primitifs flamands sont les premiers à avoir systématisé l'étude de la peinture à huile et à l'avoir magnifiée. Et notamment avec une technique bien particulière qu'on appelle le glacis, où on met peu de pigments dans un liant assez liquide. Ce qui fait ces peintres travaillent par couches successives, chaque couche étant semi-transparente, et donc avec la nécessité de superposer de nombreuses couches pour arriver à la saturation de couleurs désirée et à modeler la forme. Et ce qui a donc comme effet de laisser les scènes représentées baignées dans la lumière. Donc la lumière traverse ces couches semi-transparentes, vient taper contre un fond mat et opaque, à partir duquel se redistribue la lumière à travers l'ensemble des êtres, des espaces et des objets, baignant le tout dans une spatialité lumineuse. Donc à proprement parler, quand on regarde ces figures, on voit leur intériorité. Notre regard traverse ces couches semi-transparentes. Je vais laisser la place à Anouk. Je me déplace, mais toi, c'est bien.
Merci beaucoup à tous les deux. Merci. Toujours difficile de reprendre la parole juste après. Merci aussi, voilà, c'est pas forcément très fréquent que ce type de dispositif soit mis en œuvre ici à l'Institut, donc on vous en suis très reconnaissant. Merci. Il y a peut-être des questions dans la salle. Avant de passer la parole, juste faire une petite remarque et qui poursuit mes remerciements précédents aussi. Merci d'avoir évoqué cette idée de la composition sur et pour le papier, pour la page, et l'articulation entre la composition chorégraphique ou la composition pour le corps dansant et la composition sur la page, parce que c'est un des aspects dans le programme qu'on mène ici, de voir comment finalement l'usage, le recours au papier génère une transposition de cadre et aussi une composition pour la page. Et que cette transposition-là que vous abordez finalement dans le sens inverse est aussi extrêmement stimulante. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai une question concernant l'apparition de la silhouette. Par quel processus vous êtes arrivé à faire apparaître le profil d'une figure humaine?
Sur la fiche transparente?
Oui, la fiche transparente.
Je la montre comme ça. Vous vous rendez compte aussi. Je la montre comme ça, vous vous rendez compte aussi vous avez un aperçu de sa matérialité. De manière progressive, on a essayé différentes choses. C'est-à-dire, on a commencé par s'intéresser à incorporer les dessins abstraits. Et à un moment donné, est venu le désir d'organiser ça avec davantage de structure, peut-être aussi davantage de contraintes, qui faisait qu'il y avait un enjeu plus fin, plus défini pour le danseur ou la danseuse dans le vécu qu'elle pouvait faire de cette trace et le questionnement qu'elle pouvait vivre de comment l'amener à faire mouvement. Et je me souviens qu'une des étapes, ça avait été simplement d'avoir de nouveau une fiche transparente, mais simplement avec des lignes qui venaient créer des niveaux, et où en fait la danse aurait été aller de bas en haut, ou de haut en bas, ou de bas en haut. Et mais il y avait quelque chose de là peut-être trop rigide dans le fait d'inscrire un sens de lecture. Et petit à petit, à force d'expérimentation, on en est venu à la silhouette qui avait aussi l'avantage de créer un dedans, un dehors, ce qui permet aux danseurs, à la danseuse de vivre différemment de ces traces. Si c'est une masse ici, si c'est une ligne qui part de loin et qui traverse et qui s'arrête au niveau du foie, si c'est une ligne qui spirale dans le tibia et qui peut-être à la fin sort et termine dans le sol. Voilà, c'était vraiment le fruit d'expérimentation, et en fait c'est un endroit où on trouvait que c'était un enjeu assez difficile, assez stimulant pour organiser le processus, et où en même temps ça laisse un jeu de composition dans l'instant, de quelle trace je vais chercher, à quel endroit du corps, etc.
Merci pour cette proposition. J'avais plus une remarque sur une chose qui m'a attirée dans la performance, en fait, c'était votre rapport au regard, qui est en fait une question que je pense que j'ai depuis hier. C'est-à-dire que cette question de la lecture qui a traversé l'ensemble de ces journées, parfois sur un mode métaphorique, parfois avec une signification beaucoup plus classique. En tout cas, dans tous les cas, on engage le regard, et l'organe de l'œil qui est peut-être commun à tous ces regards, semble fonctionner très différemment, en fait, selon les exemples qu'on a traversés depuis 2 jours. Voilà, de même, je m'interroge beaucoup sur comment les notateurs regardent une danse. Comment est-ce que, quand on est formé à telle ou telle notation, ça vient possiblement... je ne sais pas comment dire, en tout cas, il y a une sorte de filtre de lecture possible qui vient se former entre l'objet donné à voir et la réception de cette danse. Un filtre que moi je n'ai pas, parce que même si je peux comprendre comment fonctionne une notation, voilà, c'est pas du tout un filtre dominant. On a tous des filtres dominants, mais voilà, qui sont plus ou moins inconscients. Et en tout cas, à vous voir, j'étais très attentive à ça, c'est-à-dire à la fois comment votre œil se posait sur le dessin, mais ce qui m'a encore plus surprise, je crois, c'est comment vous regardiez la salle, en fait. Comme si voilà, on faisait partie d'une chose qui continuait à être décryptée. Enfin, en tout cas, voilà, quand l'œil se pose sur le dessin, voilà, je ne sais pas si vous pourriez en parler. J'aimerais bien savoir comment une connexion se fait peut-être entre l'organe de l'œil et d'autres zones du corps. Enfin, est-ce que vous pouvez nommer ça? Comment ça transite? Ou est-ce que vous regardez le dessin de manière beaucoup plus tactile?
Oui,
voilà.
Justement. Donc pour moi, j'ai beaucoup travaillé sur la perception. J'ai beaucoup travaillé avec une chorégraphe, une improvisatrice chorégraphe américaine qui s'appelle Lisa Nelson, qui a énormément travaillé sur le regard, justement, sur aussi le regard des spectateurs. Et donc pour moi, la vision, c'est pas uniquement la vision, c'est-à-dire la vision, c'est tous les sens. Donc j'ai l'impression de regarder. Aussi pour moi, la vision, c'est tactile, comme tous les sens. Je veux dire, en anglais on dit the touch is the mother of senses. Donc le toucher, c'est la mère de tous les sens. Donc pour moi, tous les sens sont tactiles. Et donc à partir du moment où on considère tous les sens comme tactiles, enfin en tout cas moi, ça me met dans un état de réceptivité. Donc c'est pas quelque chose que je vais chercher, je suis pas dans quelque chose qui sort, j'ai l'impression de ne pas sortir de moi-même pour aller chercher une information, mais j'ai l'impression de me laisser, justement, Julien disait, imprégner. Donc j'ai l'impression vraiment de me laisser toucher, en fait. Donc laisser mes yeux, donc vraiment utiliser le regard comme une peau, hein, tu parlais de la peau des livres, mais j'ai vraiment laissé l'information pénétrer finalement, me toucher et toucher tout le corps. Donc moi, c'est comme ça que je le vis. Et alors aussi, ce regard, ce qui est intéressant, c'est que de ma place de performeur, évidemment, je vous vois. Et alors, c'est aussi intéressant parce que je vois vos yeux bouger. Et ça aussi, ça me renseigne beaucoup sur... comment dire, sur quoi? Sur l'authenticité de mon expérience. C'est-à-dire que même si je fais des choses très fines, je vois des yeux, même si je suis sur le pied, que j'ai pas encore, que je suis juste dans l'énergie, dans la comment on appelle ça, la l'idéokinésie, hein, de la trace. Donc ce que ça fait comme effet au niveau micro, je vois déjà des regards qui font pouf, qui descendent vers les pieds. Et donc j'ai aussi l'impression qu'on discute en fait. À travers ces traces et à travers ces manières de regarder comment elles s'activent et où est-ce qu'elles voyagent. En fait, c'est une sorte de voyage. C'est comme en peinture, finalement, ou même dans n'importe quoi, n'importe quelle œuvre d'art. C'est comment l'œil voyage. Voilà. Donc, j'ai un peu l'impression je vois, en tout cas, les gens qui me regardent, qui regardent la performance. Je vois le voyage de leur regard.
C'est assez fort aussi de revenir sur ces questions. On a parlé tout à l'heure d'attention motrice chez Stravinsky et cette question du tactile et des valeurs tactiles aussi dans l'histoire de l'art. Voilà, c'est des moments spécifiques. On parle de la Renaissance italienne et de la peinture, une partie de la peinture italienne, vraiment de ces valeurs tactiles et qui font qu'on regarde la peinture autrement. Et merci Julie d'avoir évoqué cette question du regard et de l'œil et de la tactilité aussi.
Et puis aussi
extrêmement important.
Ouais, la réceptivité aussi.
Merci. J'avais une question parce que est-ce qu'en général dans ce dispositif, dans cette performance, on voit automatiquement les dessins que tu lis, on les voit automatiquement avant de recevoir la danse ou...
Tu veux dire quand on fait vraiment la performance sans que ça soit une lecture?
Oui, sans
en fait non, mais les gens ont des petits livrets. Il y a des petits livrets qui sont distribués au public. Okay. Et il y en a là, vous pouvez regarder si vous voulez. Tu peux venir en prendre si tu veux. Et donc tous ces livrets sont tous différents, mais dans chaque livret il y a justement un dessin, il y a du texte, il y a une peinture, mais voilà. Donc voilà. Et donc en fait les spectateurs ont ça.
Ok.
Voilà.
Oui, c'était juste ça ma question. Merci.
Ouais.
Et comme c'est le cas un peu ici, souvent quand le public entre, non selon la configuration du théâtre, mais quand le public entre, le pupitre est organisé de manière à ce que les gens puissent l'apercevoir, en tout cas en s'installant. Donc il y a pas de, comme ici, d'exposition. On veut pas la montrer, mais on veut pas la cacher non plus. Et donc l'idée de ces livrets, c'est que à travers les livrets, ça permet de communiquer de quelque chose qui est présent sur le pupitre, mais en même temps, je voulais faire de cette situation une situation où justement, comme le disait Madame, le fait que notre regard est filtré soit présent. Donc plutôt que d'avoir ce livret comme une hypothétique fenêtre ouverte sur l'expérience de la danseuse, en fait, on est mis collectivement dans cette expérience de lecture, et là je fais écho aussi à ce que disait Émilie sur son propre travail. On lit ensemble, mais on lit pas la même chose, et c'est clair que ce livret me donne des informations pour lire ce que la danseuse fait, mais c'est aussi un filtre.
Alors moi je suis curieuse, qu'est-ce qui a motivé ta question?
Non, mais c'était juste que, je me demandais du coup par rapport à la position du dessin, un peu plus général par rapport à la réception du spectateur.
Et juste pour terminer avec cette histoire de livret, il y a 3 livrets différents, et c'est avec l'idée que justement cette dimension de filtre soit apparente, parce que mon voisin de gauche et mon voisin de droite vont avoir un autre livret que le mien. Donc ce dispositif-là rend clair qu'il y a plusieurs manières de lire ce qui se passe, et que donc ce que j'ai, c'est pas forcément ce qui est présent là, puisque mon voisin a cet autre dessin, ma voisine a cet autre dessin. Donc ça sans que j'ai besoin de le dire, ça défait l'idée que je serais en train de lire ce qu'elle lit.
Ils viennent d'où?
De nouveau, par économie de temps, j'ai laissé ça de côté, le texte. Alors c'est un élément qui arrive tardivement dans la pièce. Donc là, ce que vous avez vu, c'est la première partie où la danseuse danse à partir du dessin abstrait. Vers la fin, vous avez vu qu'elle retourne une image, et c'est donc évidemment cette image-ci, de la figure religieuse, et elle ferme les yeux pour commencer à l'incarner. Donc ça, c'est le début de la deuxième partie qui se développe, et il y a à proprement parler une danse de la figure qui se développe, et à un moment, elle revient au dessin abstrait. Elle abandonne la figure, elle revient au dessin abstrait. Et vers la fin de cette troisième phase, il y a une voix qui, de l'extérieur, lit un texte de même nature que celle qui se trouve dans les livrets, et qui vient aussi de nouveau, du coup, colorer la manière dont elle lit sa partition, et colore évidemment la manière dont nous, spectateurs, lisons ce qu'elle fait, parce qu'elle est de nouveau dans le registre abstrait, mais il y a comme une narration, une mini-narration qui s'amorce à l'audition. Et donc d'où ça vient? C'est un collage. Donc pour travailler la danse de la figure, on a fait des exercices d'écriture en observant la figure. Les danseuses ont écrit dessus en utilisant un protocole qui vient de Anna Halprin et Lawrence Halprin, où ils distinguent différents modes d'attention entre I see, I feel, I imagine. Ce que je vois, ce que je ressens, ce que j'imagine. Donc on a fait des exercices comme ça. Et les textes, c'est une petite composition à partir de ça. En rapport avec ce type de figure, mais de nouveau, il y a l'idée d'assumer l'artificialité de la composition. Donc le texte qu'il y a dans le livret correspond pas nécessairement à la figure que tu as dans le livret. Le texte que je lis n'a pas forcément été composé à l'origine par rapport à cette figure-là. Je me suis intéressé à ce que le texte soit intéressant par rapport à ce qui se passe sur scène, mais il vient pas nécessairement de cette figure-là. Peut-être c'était l'ange Gabriel dans une scène d'annonciation sur lequel une danseuse travaillait, et pour une raison ou pour une autre, je trouvais que cet extrait-là résonnait bien dans cette composition.
Justement, ça me permet de revenir à cette question de la silhouette, parce que c'est vrai que ce calque-là, il m'a fait penser, alors j'arrive pas à m'en souvenir précisément, mais à une pièce ou à un dessin de Hannah Alprin dans lequel cette question de la silhouette revient plusieurs fois. Je pense que c'est quelque chose qui revient plusieurs fois dans son travail, qui est probablement lié aussi à sa relation, avec Margaret H. Douglas et l'importance aussi de l'anatomie, etc. Et donc, mais la manière dont elle aussi le déplace, justement pour pas figurer un corps anatomique, mais essayer de cartographier toutes sortes d'autres flux qui traverseraient le corps. Et c'est vrai que ce qui est étonnant par rapport à la danse, c'est que ces silhouettes d'anatomie, elles sont toujours flottantes. Et c'est vrai qu'à l'inverse, la danse qui est faite, au contraire, joue beaucoup sur le poids, puisque on voit beaucoup de transferts et en même temps sans changement d'appui. Et c'est vrai que c'est quelque chose aussi, une attention au sol qui est très présente.
Ce qui est aussi présent quand même dans le tableau de Van der Weyden aussi. Ouais. Attention, justement. J'ai une petite question peut-être très terre à terre, mais c'est-à-dire que en fait, ce dispositif-là est un dispositif qui, moi en tant qu'historienne de l'art, que je regarde aussi comme un moyen d'appréhender les images, d'appréhender les dessins, et je me demandais en travaillant sur la longue durée de cette manière-là, si ça changeait aussi votre regard sur d'autres images que celles sur lesquelles vous travaillez.
Ça change certainement ma manière de regarder, oui, certainement, mais je ne regarde pas tant que ça finalement ces images, donc je n'ai pas vraiment d'expérience de ça, je ne peux pas vraiment en parler. Oui. Mais par contre, je suis sensible, par exemple, il y a quelques jours, j'étais voir une performance d'une jeune fille qui finissait son Master of Arts, et puis après je suis allée voir une exposition de peinture, et c'était exceptionnel de voir l'un après l'autre, parce que du coup je pouvais voir la peinture. Parce que mon attention avait été très aiguisée sur des choses aussi, elle faisait des choses très fines, et j'avais une attention très aiguisée, du coup je voyais la peinture, et j'étais vraiment étonnée de tout ce que ça m'ouvrait. Donc ouais, peut-être, voilà, c'était un témoignage.
Merci.
Ouais.
Bon, je laisse le mot de la fin au... Non, je veux bien, je veux pas du tout, c'est pas, mais c'est que c'est quand même, voilà, remercier Lou aussi d'avoir.
Oui. Merci beaucoup à toutes et à tous d'être là, d'être restés jusqu'à ce dernier moment. C'est vrai que j'ai l'impression qu'on vient à peine d'ouvrir une porte vers ces pratiques et ces questions de pratiques de lecture. Je retiendrai seulement un des derniers éléments qu'on a évoqué, qui est cette action simultanée du fait de regarder et d'écrire, donc qu'a évoqué Juliette et qui a ensuite été évoqué à plusieurs reprises, et qui sont évidemment une modalité aussi de saisie du geste, qui moi me semble aussi un des éléments qu'on pourrait aussi développer et tirer. En tout cas, je vous remercie encore. Je remercie à tous les membres du comité scientifique d'avoir participé et accompagné ces journées, et évidemment tous les intervenants et toutes les intervenantes. Merci encore.
Juste une petite chose que Lou a oublié, mais je pense qu'il n'a pas complètement oublié, c'est qu'on a la possibilité d'aller boire un verre après tous ensemble, voilà, au Bougainville. Donc c'est juste à côté, en sortant, j'ai plus l'adresse exacte, mais voilà, en sortant à gauche de la rue des Petits Champs et à nouveau à gauche, mais ça se trouve assez facilement si on y va, voilà, petit à petit ensemble. Voilà, merci à tous.